The Lenovo ThinkPad T60, arguably one of the most influential ThinkPads in the entire history of the brand, with many of its features being firsts for the Lenovo fleet. It was the first ThinkPad in the T-series to be fully released by Lenovo in January of 2006. Lenovo acquired the ThinkPad brand from IBM in late 2004, and while a few ThinkPads were released between then and the release of the T60, they were primarily developed by IBM. The T60 marked the beginning of the Lenovo era. It also marked the ThinkPad transition to Core 2 Duo 64-bit processors. And it was the first ThinkPad to natively support SATA hard drives. It also supported more than 2 GB of RAM, supporting 3. I know, it's a huge improvement, but still, back in 2006 this thing was a beast. This laptop also came with everything else that truly made it a ThinkPad, like an excellent keyboard, amazing build quality, and the ThinkLight. And despite a few shortcomings, it is still very much a loved machine. Across high school and college, I've seen a few T60s still in use, and I've also spotted a few out in the wild. So today we're going to see just how far you can stretch this machine to make it a viable daily driver in 2018, almost 13 years after it was released. This is a T60 I bought a while ago off Craigslist for $30. For about 2 years, it's just been sitting around because I couldn't figure out a use for it. But when I got the idea to make this video, I figured it would be time to perform some upgrades. Most of the components that we can upgrade will be replaced, and I want to basically max this machine out as best as I can, even if that means investing more money into this machine than it's actually worth. For the CPU, we have a Core Duo T2500 clocked at 2 GHz. It's alright, but it's not even a 64-bit CPU, and we can do better. So we'll be replacing it with the T7400, which is a 64-bit Core 2 Duo clocked at 2.16 GHz. There is a processor faster than this that we could put in, the T7600, but these are a lot more hard to come by and more expensive than the T7400 for a very negligible speed difference of only 200 MHz, which to me just isn't worth the extra money investment. On eBay, the only ones I could find were being shipped from China, so it would have taken 2 to 3 weeks for them to get here, which for me is just too long. For RAM, we have 2 GB. While 4 GB of RAM is recognized by the system and the operating system, because of a chipset limitation, 3 GB is the maximum amount of RAM that is supported and will be usable by the operating system. Despite this, we will be putting 4 GB in, because I actually scored a better deal on a pair of 2 GB sticks than buying just a single 2 GB stick. Plus, with 2 GB sticks, we will be getting dual channel support, which will possibly slightly boost our performance. For wireless, we have an 802.11g card, which is alright for everyday web browsing, but I want to make this as fast as we can, so we'll be replacing it with a compatible 802.11n card. Make sure it's a wireless card with a Lenovo FRU or part number on it, as until recently ThinkPads actually had a wireless card whitelist, so unless you used a modified BIOS, you had to use Lenovo authorized cards, or the system would refuse to start up. This was also an issue in IBM ThinkPads. For storage, I will be replacing the original 160GB hard drive that came with this with a 120GB SSD. The original hard drive still works, but it's the original drive, so it's well over a decade old, and so it's probably going to fail sooner or later. I was thinking about getting a 240GB drive for this machine, but I needed to keep costs down. I will say though, in this day and age, you can get a 120GB SSD from a reputable brand for less than $30, so there's really no reason not to have it in any desktop or laptop you build. I was also planning on ordering an Ultra Bay hard drive caddy for this machine to add more storage, but I ended up not doing that. So for most of these upgrades, we really don't have to do that much. If you just need to replace the hard drive, all you have to do is remove the screw from the bottom and pull out the hard drive caddy. Then you take out the 4 screws holding the hard drive in place and pop in your new SSD, put the screws back on, put the rubber rails back in place, and slide the caddy back in. If your ThinkPad didn't come with a caddy, you can order a replacement from eBay or Amazon for very cheap. For RAM upgrades, there are 4 screws on the bottom we have to remove in order to remove the palm rest. You can see the 2 sticks of RAM right here. To upgrade everything else, we'll have to remove 2 additional screws from the bottom of the laptop. One of them is marked with a keyboard icon, the other doesn't have any label. After you take these 2 screws out, then you can take off the keyboard and the keyboard bezel. You can see the wireless card right here. 2 screws are securing it in place, and we can easily remove those, disconnect the wireless antennas, and swap out the old wireless card for the new one. For the processor, there's a fan assembly we're going to have to take out. On models with the dedicated GPU, there's a metal plate here we have to remove. After that, we have to remove the screws that hold the heatsink and fan assembly in place, and you might want to unplug the fan from the motherboard. However, in my case, I was actually able to get it out without removing the fan plug. You'd also want to check up on your fan, as this thing's pretty old at this point. You should always get some compressed air to clean out the fan blades. You'll want to take advantage of this time where the heatsink is removed to remove old thermal paste from it, which by this point might be completely dry. Get your new processor, which in my case didn't have any thermal paste on it, and make sure there's no old thermal paste on there as well. Insert the new CPU and put some new thermal paste on. In my case, I'm using Arctic MX4, which is my tried and true thermal paste. You can get it for very cheap, and it works better than the original thermal paste most manufacturers use. Make sure to lock the processor back in place, and then put the fan assembly back on. Make sure to plug the fan in too, otherwise you're going to get a fan error when you start the computer. After that, it's just a matter of doing everything in reverse to put the computer back together. So now that we've done all of these upgrades to the T60, I'm going to be using this as my main computer for a whole week. That means that my daily driver, a ThinkPad X240 and T430, are going to be put away for a week. And my desktop daily driver, the Dell Optiplex 790, will also be powered down for the week. I'm going to be doing everything on this T60 for the week. This includes web browsing, schoolwork, gaming, and video editing. I adjusted to the heavier weight of the T60 fairly quickly. Honestly, after a while, I didn't even notice it. One of the most glaring issues I've noticed with the T60 is the display. The main issue with this display and all other older ThinkPad models is that it is backlit using CCFL tubes. They aren't as bright as LEDs, use more energy, and die a lot quicker. There are ways that you can modify these screens to use an LED backlight instead, but it's a very hands-on process, and if you mess something up, you can ruin your screen. Other than the display woes, there really hasn't been much about my newer ThinkPads that makes me miss them, other than slightly faster processors. Everything loads just about as fast on here as it would on a newer computer. Web browsing takes a little bit longer with the older 802.11n standard, but it's perfectly usable. Even more demanding sites like YouTube, Facebook, Fox News, and CNN load without much issue. Some of them take a little bit longer to load, but once they are loaded, I can even scroll through fairly smoothly, which I've seen brand new computers struggle with. The main issue here is lack of RAM. We are limited to 3 GB after all. With Windows 10 installed, even just the operating system sitting at idle can take more than a gigabyte of RAM. Add in a few Chrome tabs and you're out of RAM. With Google Chrome, once you run out of RAM, it starts loading the least used tabs into the page file of the operating system. This typically means when you click on the tab it has to reload, but it's not too big of an issue, and it wasn't terribly obtrusive in my work. Microsoft Office 365 ran without a hitch on this machine. And everything loaded fairly quickly too. Even once I got a decently sized PowerPoint going, I had no issues with it, and it presented perfectly fine as well. YouTube worked great, and I could even stream HD video in full screen without much of a hitch. When you first load the player into full screen, the system hangs up a little bit, but once everything's loaded, it plays without a problem. When it comes to gaming, whether or not the T60 is a viable option for you really depends on what kind of games you play. If you primarily play older PC titles, or even some low-demanding indie titles, then this machine should play them fine. Older PC games like Team Fortress 2, SimCity 4, Roller Coaster Tycoon 3, and The Sims 3 ran fairly well. The Sims 3 I was actually able to play at the native resolution of the display, 1400 by 1050. Same with Roller Coaster Tycoon 3, however in both cases I had to turn some detail settings down. I could have also reduced the resolution of the games and cranked up some details if I wanted to. Team Fortress 2 ran at 1024 by 768 with a mixture of medium and high settings, at a relatively playable frame rate of between 40 and 50 frames per second. Now, I don't have very much experience with Team Fortress 2, so I was kind of just randomly entering this match and just hoping for the best, but it seemed pretty playable to me. Minecraft can run on a Raspberry Pi, so it's no surprise that it could run on this machine. However, when I tried to film, I kept getting issues with the game crashing, so unfortunately I don't have any footage for you. The newest game I was able to run on this machine, that I know of, was Csgo. However, I don't recommend playing the game on here, as the only way it could even be remotely playable is at all low settings on 640 by 480 resolution, which I actually wasn't able to do without the game crashing. You can see it running here at 800 by 600, which is acceptable, but not exactly what I would call playable. Modern indie titles, if they aren't very demanding, might run fine on this machine, but really, any game after 2009 or 2010 is probably a lost cause for this machine. Emulation, on the other hand, is perfectly fine on this thing if you stick to older systems. I haven't tested every console on here, but I think it's safe to say that any system up through the PlayStation 1 and Nintendo 64 era should run fine on this without any major issues. Video editing on this thing is possible. It can be done, but I don't recommend it. I was able to install the newest version of Vegas Movie Studio, my preferred editing software, without any issues. And I was able to load some 1080p 60 frame per second video files off my camcorder into the software without too many issues, other than it taking a while. But if you're going to edit on this thing, you really need to be patient. Higher resolution and higher frame rate and higher bitrate videos do cause the system to lag, so it's not very useful to try and edit the videos in this software, or really any software. Lower resolution and lower bitrate videos and standard definition videos should be perfectly editable. Rendering is fine if you have a lot of patience. I made a test video at 1920 by 1080 at 60 frames per second, and rendered it in the MPEG-4 format, which would be suitable for YouTube. It was a 2-minute video, and it took almost 30 minutes to render. By contrast, my ThinkPad T430 with a Core i7-3612QM processor can render a 25 to 30 minute video in the same time frame, and my Dell Optiplex computer can probably render videos even faster. So, it can be done, but you have to have a lot of patience and a lot of time to kill when you're waiting for the video to render. There is one way to get more performance out of this machine, and that's with the ThinkPad Advanced Dock. Like most docking stations for laptops, this adds a plethora of I/O to the laptop, including some legacy ports that can't be found on the laptop itself, such as parallel port, serial port, and PS2 mouse and keyboard ports. It also gives you an SD card reader and a compact flash reader, both of which are not found on the T60 without the use of expansion cards. There's an additional Ultra Bay drive on this dock, which gives you the ability to add a second optical drive or a second hard drive for the T60 to use. But probably the most amazing feature about this docking station is that it has a PCI Express slot on the bottom, which can be used for a desktop GPU with this machine. There's only one model of GPU that is officially supported by IBM/Lenovo, but really any GPU can fit in here as long as it's a single-slot, low-profile card that uses less than 50 watts of power. I'm working on a follow-up to this video where we put in a graphics card into this dock and see how much more performance we can get out of the T60. So after using this laptop for a week, what do I think? Well, it was perfectly usable as a daily driver, and I could definitely tolerate it, but I do miss my newer ThinkPads and my desktop, just because of their improvements in speed and gaming performance. If you need a really cheap budget laptop for school, work, or whatever, there are plenty of other laptops, including other ThinkPads you can buy within a similar price range. T61 and T400 units sell for around the same price as a working T60, and both of them are better options. I would recommend staying away from the T61 because of the notorious NVIDIA GPU failure that plagued the T61. But if you really want to take a shot at it, and you don't mind the potential of the GPU failing, then go ahead. It is, after all, the last ThinkPad to have a 4:3 aspect ratio display. And it can take the full advantage of 4 GB of RAM, or even 8 GB with a BIOS mod. It also has newer Core 2 Duo processors, which will definitely help in the performance of the machine. The T400 uses newer and even faster Core 2 Duo processors, and there's even been some luck getting Core 2 Extreme processors to work in it. In addition, it has newer graphics cards, and uses DDR3 RAM, which is definitely faster than DDR2. It also, out of the box, supports SATA 2 speeds, which are faster than the SATA 1 speeds present on the T60 and T61. Out of the old-school ThinkPad models from the Core 2 Duo era, the T400 would be my recommendation. But if you really like the classic IBM style but still want some modern performance, then the T60 is a decent option. It has an excellent keyboard, with the higher resolution displays, a decent display even in 2018, and it still has plenty of room for expandability and upgradability for any additional features you might need, such as a card bus slot and an express card slot for adding an SD card reader, FireWire, USB 3.0, or whatever else your heart desires. Stay tuned for part 2 of this video where we look at the advanced dock and how well it can improve GPU performance. And as always, I hope you guys enjoyed the video, and thanks for watching.